Today's video is about a short stop-motion film from the year 1992 called Food. This film is divided into 3 parts: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Let's take a look at breakfast first. In the beginning, a well-dressed man enters a small and dirty room. This room has a floor piled with disposable tableware, worn wall lamps, and walls painted with orthographic symbols. But this gentleman seems to not really care about the environment of the room as he takes off his cap and sits down on the chair. Let's call this gentleman Man A. Man B sits directly on the opposite side of the table, not moving at all. A looks down and sees many paper trays of eaten food. It seems like he doesn't really care about this and just brushes the tray to the floor with the others. After A looks around the room, he turns his head around and looks at B's instructions. However, he can't see the words clearly, so he puts on his glasses and takes a look again. According to the instructions, the first step is that he has to give the coins to Man B. From his coat pocket, he takes out a bunch of coins, but in actuality, he only needed 3 coins. So he put the rest of the coins back into his pockets. However, he couldn't find a coin slot on Man B. So for the 3rd time, he puts on his glasses and reads the instructions again. He squeezes B's nose, and because B couldn't breathe, he could only open his mouth. A then reaches into B's mouth with his hand and pulls out B's tongue. A puts 3 coins into B's tongue. After B swallowed the coins, A hits B on his forehead, causing B to shake back and forth. There was a sound of coins shaking around in B's body, but Man B still has no reaction or movement. This causes A to read the instructions one more time. It turns out that the final step is to click Man B's eye to start a reaction. After Man A clicked Man B's eyes, in B's body there is an elevator that rises up and serves a simple but rough-looking meal from the body and delivers it in front of Man A. The man looks very hungry, but he doesn't have the utensils to eat. He reads the instructions for the 5th time and gives B a nice uppercut to his chin. Then from B's ears, a knife and a fork come out. After A gets the utensils to eat the food, he wolfs down the food very quickly, and after he finishes, the remains of what he ate and the remains of the trays on the floor are quite similar. A then reads the instructions for the 6th time and looks under the table, then kicks B's knee. From B's pocket suddenly rises a napkin. After A cleans his mouth and pushes the tableware in front of B, A's body suddenly moves like a machine, moving rapidly, then suddenly stopping. Right after Man A stopped, Man B revives immediately. B stretches his body with some warm-up moves and takes off his instruction manual and hangs it on A's neck. He then takes his cap and uses the black marker and draws a line down on the wall filled with lines. B then leaves the opposite door that A came in from. Before the door can fully be closed, Man C comes in. Man C is just like Man A. After he pushes the tableware onto the floor, he finishes reading the instructions in one go. The next part is similar to what happened with Man A. Squeezing the nose, pulling out the tongue, giving coins, hitting forehead, squeezing the eyeballs, waiting for the food, getting utensils, enjoying the meal, cleaning his mouth, and pushing the tableware in front of Man A. Similar to what happened last time, Man C has become like a machine. Man A revives and gives the instructions to Man C. Man A then takes his hat and draws another line on the wall. Then he opens the door he came in from and leaves the room. When he opens the door, we can see a very long line of people still waiting. Let's do a little analysis of the breakfast scene. This film symbolizes the early days of capitalism. Individuals get paid for other services to buy other services. Shabby manuals and messy notes on the wall symbolize the imperfect capitalist system. The food elevator from the unknown abyss symbolizes the imperfection of the early technology of capitalism. The way of service is based on physical violence against others, symbolizing violent capital transactions. The long line indicates that there is only one service system in this society. Last but not least, every time food is wasted, as well as the messy environment, symbolizes and shows the waste of resources and damage to the environment. Lunch. 2 strangers sit at the same table at a restaurant, waiting to order their food. But the busy waiter ignores them and just walks past. The man sitting on the left wears a Western-style leather suit, dressed neatly, and understands Western food etiquette, representing the upper middle class. I want to call him a businessman. Because the waiter did not come to their table, the businessman decides to clean his utensils and his plate with the napkin. But sitting on the right side, we have a man with long hair and clothes that don't seem to be clean. He sees that the businessman is cleaning his utensils, so he studies the businessman and spits on his own utensils to try and clean them. Wiping the utensils with spit and also with his clothing shows that he doesn't understand the dining etiquette of high-end restaurants. It can be seen that he represents the middle or lower class people. I want to call him a civilian. Because the civilian almost spat on the businessman raises his hand with a napkin to try and prevent this. And from the way the civilian cleaned his utensils, the businessman looks down upon him with a very condescending glare. The waiter goes past the table again. The businessman begins to arrange the flowers in a more pleasant view. The civilian tries to do the same thing, but he didn't arrange the flowers any better, and rather dropped one of them. Because the civilian is too hungry, he begins to eat the flower. The businessman sees this and glares again with the same condescending eyes. The civilian seems to be visibly ashamed as he takes out the flower from his mouth and uses it as a decoration on his clothing. After the businessman sees this, he begins to wear his handkerchief, grabs all the flowers and places them on his plate. He then uses his fork and knife and elegantly eats the flowers. The civilian, wanting to study the businessman, tries to use the fork and pick up the flower, but he doesn't know how to use the fork and resorts to using his hand to pick up and eat the flower. At the same time, the businessman has just finished eating the flowers, and he then picks up the flower vase and drinks the liquid inside. When the civilian wants to drink it as well, he realizes that there is no more liquid left, and so he just swallows the entire vase. After the businessman finishes using the handkerchief, he places it on his plate, then uses his fork and knife to maintain his elegant eating. The civilian still wants to study the businessman, but he doesn't have a napkin, so he takes out a dirty rag and places it on his plate. Because the civilian couldn't cut the rag with a knife and fork, he uses his hands and just directly eats it. The businessman sneers at the civilian, and using his fingers, he plucks out a remaining thread of the handkerchief and throws it away. The waiter passes for the third time, but still ignores them. The businessman starts to take off his shoes and begins to enjoy his meal. The civilian was shocked by what the businessman did, but he didn't hesitate to study him as he takes off his shoes and eats them as well. However, because the civilian doesn't know how to properly utilize the fork and knife like last time, he just directly swallows his own shoes. While the businessman begins to eat his suspenders like noodles, the civilian doesn't have that, so he just takes off his belt instead and eats it. When the businessman eats his pants, the civilian studies him. When the businessman eats his coat, the civilian continues to study him. Maybe the only difference between these two is that one of them knows how to use utensils and the other doesn't. They gradually begin to eat more and more of their clothing and less is on their body. Eventually, the businessman begins to eat his own underwear and the civilian still tries to learn from him. While the civilian takes off his underwear, the businessman smells something quite unpleasant. The waiter still passes the table, not caring for them. Now, they don't have any clothes to eat anymore, so they begin to eat their plates. They split the tablecloth and eat that, then they start to eat the table. The businessman cuts the table like chocolate. But like I said before, because the civilian doesn't know how to use utensils, he just eats the table with his own mouth. The waiter goes past them for the 5th time, but he still ignores them. They don't have a choice and can only eat the chair now. Then the waiter goes past for the 6th time, and it doesn't matter how badly they want to get the waiter's attention, the waiter just hurries past. At this point, they don't have anything left to eat. The businessman looks at the civilian for a second and eats his utensils. The civilian studying from him also eats his own utensils. The businessman then smiles as he takes out his knife and fork from his mouth and slowly approaches the civilian, preparing to eat him. Similar to the breakfast segment, the lunch segment is also about eating. But this time, they are not eating food. They are eating themselves and what is around them. The lunch segment symbolizes the development of capitalism. The emergence of the rich and the poor means the formation of classes within society. The waiter alluded to a mature industrial system that can be used for reference. The decoration of the restaurant means that resources can be used, and the inability to order food means that capital cannot directly obtain results. From the very beginning, the lower class can only imitate, meaning they cannot innovate. The upper class starts to eat flowers and even eats the table from the lower class. It shows that the brain of the upper class is superior in regards to the lower class. The expressions of the rich and the poor when eating large-scale resources such as clothing indicate that everyone is equally greedy. The waiter appeared 6 times in the film. In the beginning, eating decoration, eating clothing, and eating tables respectively means the germination, development of capital, losing shame, and starting with the lower class. At the same time, because the lower class had already eaten his utensils, otherwise the things he uses to produce goods, there's no way in which the lower class can oppose the upper class, only becoming a meal for them. Dinner. An old man wearing a high-class suit looking like an upperclassman uses various spices and condiments to enhance his flavor. But when he finally finishes adding the add-ons, he picks up his fork and puts it on his left hand. But the way he puts it onto his left hand is very unique. He hammers 2 nails to nail down the fork onto his hand. Why is it his fake hand? Well, that's because his actual dinner is his left hand. He then takes a knife to take off his marriage ring and begins to cut his own hand. The scene then changes to a sports athlete. His dinner is his left foot. He takes off his cleats and begins to enjoy his meal. The next person seems to be a very rich woman who wears very expensive clothing. She adds lemon juice on her dinner, which were 2 breasts. In the last scene, a very hairy and obese man is eating his sex tool on a smoke-dusted table with some beer on the side. Once he discovers that someone is recording the scene, he is very embarrassed and begins to hide his dinner, telling the camera to move away and stop recording him. Because dinner is happening during nighttime, everyone loses their honor and shows their true nature, symbolizing a perfect capitalist system. The 4 people appearing in this part of the film represents the upper class, the rich male businessman, an energetic young adult, the young man wearing sportswear, a woman dressed in attractive male clothing, the dressed up young woman, and the working class, the naked man. There was no service staff at the dinner, and the bald man didn't require them to bring food to him. Obviously, he had so many sauces and condiments, and he wants to eat what he wants, so that in the end, he was empty enough to eat a hand that made his own wealth. It is believed that keeping his right hand is due to the idea that people are always greedy for life and fear death. And of course, it is quite inconvenient to live without the right hand. It can be seen that greed and egoism preserves humanity while leaving them extremely empty. The soccer player eats his calf, which means that he no longer expects to improve upon his future after becoming famous, which is also an emptiness inside of him. The rich lady eats her breasts because of similar reasons. In the end, while carefully observing the environment around the big-footed man, you can see a little red and white checkered tablecloth sprinkled with a little ash and soup, a common glass ashtray stuffed with cigarette butts, and a large filled beer, plus a shirtless man full of chest hair. He created a state of life that is invisible and unsatisfactory. This also refers to the emptiness and hopelessness of being satisfied while being bound to sex. And the final shame is out of the obscurity of sex. It is also due to the film's last protection of human dignity after all the ugliness of human nature was fully exposed. Of course, this is only one perspective of understanding. If you were to think about it, this film would have much more than just 3 meanings. Like for the breakfast part, another theory could be that through the short film, the director showed a lot of surreal places and a mechanized character B. Thus, after character A finishes eating, character A undertakes the job, character B leaves, and character C enters. With the same result, character C completes the mechanization process and undertakes the work. But at the end of the breakfast scene, when the door opens, you can see a long queue of people outside the door waiting for this way of eating. In other words, everyone is accustomed to this type of dining. It can be seen from comparisons that the character and environment in breakfast are suggesting the bottom groups or working class in society. In their own class, they pay each other money to get food, and the cycle is so numb that it is difficult to break through this class one day. And the food they exchange for 3 coins, you can see that it is food eaten by the last person, delivered from their body. I think this can imply that even if people in this class have access to food sources, there are problems in its quality. It seems that people at the bottom serve each other and help each other. But invisibility is also a type of deception. But because of the premise of survival, everyone chooses to ignore this kind of deception and become numb to the cycle. It can be seen that although the lives of the workers at the bottom of the circle are repeated, there is still an interesting thought. That is, while producing food and consuming food, there is always a shortage of production and consumption, and thus a mechanized cycle has begun. In the end, this film from any perspective is an excellently made film. Getting a score of 8.1 on IMDB isn't an easy feat. In the breakfast part, it symbolizes the machinery being repeated. In the lunch part, high-ranking people eat low-ranking people. And in the dinner part, humans begin to eat themselves. From a funny perspective, this also explores a ridiculous reality. Therefore, I strongly recommend you guys to watch the short film. It's only around 17 minutes. If you like it, you'll experience a great 17 minutes. And if you don't like it, well, it is only 17 minutes, and giving it a watch won't hurt.